Okay, so here we are. New Sonic game comes out and I make my opinion months later. Really hitting that algorithm hard, am I right? This break has given me time to really think about how I feel about the game. I could have made a first impressions video, but obviously it's a little too late for that. It doesn't help that at the time I didn't really even know how to put my thoughts into words. Sonic Frontiers is a very important game in the franchise. It sold great. In fact, it's the fastest selling Sonic game of all time. And overall, everyone enjoyed it. I also thought the game was fun and a step in the right direction, but there are some aspects that hold me back from outright loving it. This is probably going to sound like a negative video, but I did really like the game. I'd probably give it about like an 8 out of 10. It's pretty good. And this is before the updates, especially the new playable characters. I'm very excited about that. But I will be sure to keep you posted, and I will probably make a little update video about that when it comes out. But as for the base game, Sonic Frontiers accomplishes a pretty challenging task, getting Sonic to work in an open world setting. Rather than spacing everything really far away from each other, which would be really easy to do with Sonic's speed, they decided to make everything incredibly dense. Whether it's a platforming challenge, a puzzle, a boss, or a cyberspace level, you never feel like you've been plopped into a big empty world. From a gameplay perspective, my biggest issue holding this game back is this. These Starfall Islands are just kind of boring. First, let's go over the aesthetics. I know the jokes went around that Sega hired this man when the gameplay was first shown off, and unfortunately, I feel like those sentiments are a bit warranted. There's 5 islands. 3 of them are fields, 1 is a desert, and 1 is a volcano, which is basically just a desert with occasional lava flows. Even if the game wasn't going for its more grounded aesthetics, it would still be lacking. Imagine if they just made everything have a checkerboard and then called the islands Star Hill, Desertopia, Lava Valley, Green Mountain, and Verdant Steppe. It wouldn't suddenly make the Starfall Islands interesting, it would just be the exact same problem, except now it has a Sonic coat of paint. But hey, with a more grounded aesthetic, they can use that setting to tell a story with the landscape. But unfortunately, they don't really do this either. There's character moments that reference aspects of the islands, but basically, if the game doesn't stop to tell you this is important to the island and the character you're speaking to, it usually isn't important at all. There's a decent amount of ruins on the island, sure, but what is this ancient tower for? What about the admittedly cool tunnel section? Was it an aqueduct or a labyrinth meant to keep people out? How about these ruins? Or these? They're all just there as set pieces, things for Sonic to climb or run through or run past. And that's fine and can work, but it makes it hard to tell, oh, these are the important ruins, without the game stopping you, as I mentioned before. That doesn't even count the situations where they'd have you play pinball or they have you pick up and do a crane game. Like, what does this have to do with any of it? Like, it's video gaming, but they want you to care about the island itself, but they don't do a good job marrying the two ideas. The only other issue I have with the world aesthetically are the floating, disconnected platforms that hold most of the platforming challenges. As I mentioned, these are actually pretty fun, and I get why they exist from a gameplay perspective. I have to give Sonic Team credit. I feel like they solved a decent problem with most of the big open Sonic fan games that I've played. How do we get people to actually interact with the world instead of just skipping everything? It's been one of my most recurring gripes in pretty much every 3D Sonic fan game. Sonic's airspeed is just completely broken. So the most efficient way to play is just to ignore everything and fly over every obstacle. I do think Sonic Frontiers went a bit too far in the opposite direction by eliminating almost every way you can carry your momentum out of a jump. But like I said, making the small obstacles that you normally skip over the actual goals of the world is a good compromise. I just don't understand why they needed to be so disconnected from everything. Sonic has always had a way of tying its mechanics to the level in question. Obviously, we're excluding things like rings and springs and dash pads, but everything else has historically tied to the level in one way or another. I'm not asking for Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze levels of aesthetic integration, but I am asking for more than New Super Mario Bros. These bare, boring platforms just end up making everything feel kinda samey. Even if I enjoyed them in the moment, it's not like I can tell you which one is my favorite or anything, and a lot of that has to do with the disjointed presentation. This also has a bit of a domino effect, as because of their separation from anything around them, we can't have fun gimmicks that relate to the zone that we're in. Instead of having, say, the desert challenges use these firework cacti, they instead make all of them the same. This is of course excluding Chaos Island, which figured a good idea to spice things up was to lock players into 2D sections for a majority of the challenges, making it pretty much everyone's least favorite island. You wouldn't have to do this if you just incorporated the world into the platforming challenges, just saying. Don't get me wrong, I know why these are the way that they are. Sonic Team historically hasn't been given a huge budget for their games, ever since Sega stopped being a first-party company and making their own consoles. But thanks to the success of Sonic Frontiers, that sounds like that's going to be changing, and that's good, but hopefully bringing up things I dislike about the open zone will make the next Sonic game feel even better. Moving on to cyberspace, really the biggest issue with them is that they're recycled content, and the boost button is honestly just a little pointless. Pretty much all the levels here would probably feel better if Sonic had just moved at the speed that the boost puts him at, and you can just give him an air dash to make up for the air boost. Having only 4 level aesthetics, with only one of the 4 being original, is pretty disheartening, and while I appreciate the references to some older Sonic games, it's pretty clear that these are the way that they are for the same reasons that the platforming challenges are the way that they are. I'd like to like them more, but it's not like they're bad or anything. They're just the fun sections ripped straight from other Sonic games, so it's not like there would be any duds. Just, please. Green Hill Zone, Chemical Plant Zone, and Sky Sanctuary are not the only classic levels. They're not the only old levels you could use. Changing up to some oddball levels like Azure Lake, Music Plant, Sky Babylon, it would definitely help. But the biggest thing I'd want to see if they reapproached the idea of discoverable levels in the open zone would be 100% original levels. I want you guys to think about this for a second. We haven't had a game with 100% original levels since Sonic Colors. That is 13 years without a Sonic game referencing the past in one way or another. I might make this a talking point for another video, leave a comment if you want to hear it, but it cannot be understated how amazing a new 100% original Sonic game would be. And when Sonic Frontiers does let loose, it's honestly fantastic. The main 100% original things in this game are the story and the boss fights. The boss fights are easier to talk about, so let's start there. The bosses you fight while exploring, the Guardians, are honestly all solid, except for Strider, because he blocks your vision when you first get there, and your defense stat is usually so low when you first get to him that you just lose all your rings in one hit and you're locked onto a rail and then you die. Caterpillar also goes into that category because he's just a smaller Strider, and that's boring. All the other ones I thought were pretty good to fight. They each had a gimmick to figure out, so they weren't super button mashy, but it also wasn't so impossible to figure out their gimmick that it was frustrating. And each one of these Guardians has its own theme music, and that's pretty great. You wouldn't really expect these missable bosses to have their own themes, but they really do treat them like bosses that you would see in any other Sonic game. But they're just out in the open world. Then of course you have the Titans. These are 3 great boss fights, and also Supreme is there, by any means necessary. Again, like Cyberspace and the platforming challenge, you can tell some corners were cut here, but the first 3 bosses were all top notch. Just like the Guardians, they have a puzzle to solve before you can really lay into them. I mean, Giganto doesn't really, but the other 3 do. And their spectacle is off the charts. If this is Sonic Team on a limited budget, I can't wait to see what they do when they're given some more freedom. I also think I'm like the only person who likes the final boss. I like the change of pace compared to the rest of them, and I think they did a good job working with what they had. That said, if they wanted to add a second phase, I wouldn't object to it at all, but I'm satisfied with what we got. Plus, the monologue that plays over it is really cool, and the music is also fantastic. I've listened to it just as much as I've listened to the other boss theme. Can we go back to that monologue for a second, though? Because it's time to talk about the story. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the story of Sonic Frontiers is good, but I will say that it was absolutely what was needed for the Sonic franchise. I mentioned that the games haven't gone 13 years without referencing the past. This is merely on a surface level. You look at Forces in Lost World and they expect you to get hyped for seeing Green Hill Zone again. And that's really all you get as far as referencing any kind of character growth or any kind of anything from previous games. I know after Sonic 06, they really wanted to get back to the root of Sonic. They cut out most of the cast and simplified a lot. This paid off, but cutting a tree down to the roots means that you also end up losing a lot of good branches. On top of that, rather than allowing the tree to grow some new branches, every time they released a new Sonic game, they would just cut it all down again to find the roots. For 13 years, Sonic as a franchise was not given a chance to grow, expand, or evolve. Sonic Frontiers is Sonic Team finally realizing that the tree needs some branches again. Like I said, the story honestly isn't great, but it's really just a tool to put the characters back where they were, or to put them on track to where they're supposed to be. Really all that happens in the story as far as Sonic is concerned is that he falls onto an island, and then he saves his friends, and then he beats up a boss, and then he leaves. That's it. It's a very small story. And the story of the ancient people and their lost civilization is less important than how it impacts the characters involved. So rather than talking about the main story, I'm just going to talk about the characters themselves. I do want to mention that having the ancients be the ancestors of the Chao and having Chaos as basically like the last ancient that was like reverse engineered from the Master Emerald radiation, that's pretty cool. I love the world building that's added, but ultimately it's not like it's moving any sort of overarching plot forward. And as far as we're aware, Chaos is like dead. So it's more like fun little trivia instead of something that's actually important. Unless they're like planning something. Anyway, back to the characters. There's actually not a lot of characters, so it's easy to go in depth with all of them. I want to start with Amy because she's the character that's had it the worst since like ever. Amy's gone from being Sonic obsessed to basically having no personality besides girl, and I'm not 100% sure if this changes that. I think the thing holding Amy back is that she hasn't ever had her own big moment. Tails is a sidekick and has spin-offs and TV shows and a ton of ways to really make an impact. The same goes for Knuckles, except he was also able to start off as an antagonist. Amy, from a Western perspective, just sort of showed up, and her gimmick was that she crushed hard on Sonic and he didn't like it. Everything about Amy has always tied to her feelings towards Sonic, so when they ended up taking all of that away later on, it just kind of felt like she was hollow. I guess her other personality traits are that she's caring, but she also has kind of a short fuse, especially in games like Sonic Battle and Heroes, where it's definitely more swing first, ask questions later, when people are in her way. I mainly bring all this up because the Amy in this is unrecognizable as a character. Like I said, everything was stripped away when they stopped making Sonic 90% of her personality, so she's just been a blank slate, a Kyrie of a character. Until they actually give her something to do, which she really hasn't had since, like, Sonic 06? 17 years ago? Anyway, until they give her something to do and a story of her own, I just can't really feel anything for her as a character. I want to, but even in the IDW comics, they spend a good chunk of time realigning her character, so it's hard to get a good beat on who she is. I can go into further detail on this if you want in a separate video, but I think it's time to move on. For Knuckles, I like what they ended up doing with him. His personality in the animated short is exactly what I wanted. This is an extension of that, so good job. Not too much to talk about with him. He's just solid, and it's nice to have him as, like, you know, a more focused character who isn't just a big old bundle of jokes. And by the way, Knuckles can be funny as long as he is not the butt of the joke. If the joke is that he is dumb, that I want more than that for Knuckles. Tails was also done pretty well in this one. His whole character arc is just a repeating cycle of self-doubt and imposter syndrome, but in some games it's resolved, and in some games it's never resolved. In Frontiers, they reference that, specifically for Forces. I'm glad they aren't just ignoring Forces, but it's unfortunate that they have to write the franchise out of that hole. Tails cowered to Chaos Zero when he already fought Chaos 4 and won. I know everyone, this is like a low-hanging fruit. Like, every time people just talk about the whole Chaos Zero. Oh my god, why is he cowering for Chaos Zero? But if they didn't do a good job explaining it, I'm sorry. The whole previous era of Sonic was basically Sonic is the hero, the rest are incompetent. And it ended up hitting Tails pretty hard since he's supposed to be, you know, sidekick who is competent. But really all he did was just stand there and say, Sonic, please save the day. It'll be nice to see what they do with him after this game. Eggman didn't really have much to do in this one. He mainly just existed in cyberspace and complained about existing in cyberspace, but the egg memos are fun. I wish we got to see more of the bond between him and Sage on screen instead of just hearing how he feels in the memos and then having that ending where he, you know, has very clearly had an attachment and had something grow and build, but we never see it. And that leads me to Sage, the newest character. I hope she sticks around because I really like that Eggman has his own little Bowser Jr. and it's done in his own little Eggman way. I hope we get to see more of her, and I like her arc. I mean, the whole trusting Sonic thing is probably going to be gone in the next game, otherwise there just won't be a conflict between Sonic and Eggman. But it was the real meat of the story, let's be real. I do have to comment on the flashbacks she has when listening to Sonic and Tails talk. It probably would have hit home better if we saw any form of bond between her and Eggman on screen before this point. Did they just, like, forget to include those scenes or something? The scene is ridiculously awkward. Did they just assume the memos would be enough? Anyway, her concept is great, and as someone who became a dad a little over a week before this game came out, I can't help but like her as a character. Yeah, I have some personal bias on this one. Sue me. Finally, we have the Blue Boy himself. He's less abrasive this time around, but he still has some moments where his cocky personality comes out, mainly around Knuckles and Eggman. It's balanced pretty well. The story in this game isn't really at world-ending levels till the very end, so this gives him time to actually talk to his friends like they're his friends. Whether it's Amy going on some weird tangent about love, Knuckles discussing his struggles being the last of his kind, or Tails and his lack of confidence, he actually cares about them. I really don't expect the next Sonic game to have the same opportunities for Sonic to care the way that he does here, but simply showing that he isn't a quit machine is really all I needed to see. Honestly, I think I like Sonic for a lot of the same reasons that I like Spider-Man. They're both friendly and lighthearted characters who know when to have a laugh and when to take things seriously. The motivations are obviously entirely different. Spider-Man is all focused on personal responsibility and Sonic's all about personal freedom, but they both require that tonal balancing act where they can't be too quippy without feeling like a jerk and lowering the stakes of the story, but they also can't be too serious or they lose what makes them charming. I really do want to emphasize that, although I don't think the story is very interesting, it's how they present it along with the characters that appeals to me. This is the first Sonic game in a while that takes itself seriously, and I didn't realize how much I missed that. Sure, you can say Lost World and Forces also took themselves seriously, but they really didn't give their stories or characters any opportunity to leave any sort of substantial impact. I really refer to Forces in particular as like a nothing game. It's a game that lasts 3 hours, there isn't really anything offensive in those 3 hours, and when the credits roll you forget pretty much everything that happened. Is that better than an outright bad game like Sonic 06? Maybe, But if you have to choose between a game that just ticks all the Sonic game boxes and calls it a day, and a game that really tries to be better than what came before, I'll take that 10 times out of 10. Sonic Frontiers is in the latter camp, only it mostly succeeds in what it tries to accomplish. As I mentioned, this is the fastest selling Sonic game ever, so clearly others have noticed the ambition too. Here's hoping that Sonic Team continues to reach for the stars, and I look forward to the endless possibilities that lie in store. Oh yeah, wait, don't forget to subscribe!